Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to the League of Women Voters webinar tonight. My name is Barbara Grosh. I'm the president of the League in Rochester, New York, and we're happy to welcome tonight Lindsey Cormack. She's an author, um, and I think I'm going to let Lindsey tell us so she's a professor of political science, I believe, but I'm going to let you give the details because I didn't prepare that well. Um, okay, so just a reminder, the League is a nonpartisan membership organization, so we don't ever endorse candidates or parties. Instead, we work on trying to empower voters and make them feel informed and eager to vote. So take it away, Lindsey. And I assume you'll talk for a while. Do you want us to hold questions or interrupt you as we get questions?
You can interrupt as they come to you. We're a very manageable group, I think. So if there's
Yeah.
something that you want to just say or do the raise hand, whatever is the natural way to do it, please feel free. You all can see my screen, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for letting me share this evening with you. I am excited to talk to you about this. And like I was saying a little bit earlier, one of the best things about getting to speak with people who are members of the league is you all understand the importance of what we're trying to do here. So I'm hopeful that I bring you some new information, some things that you can share with others. And as always, if you have questions, just ask them. So it's a good thing that Mary didn't prepare too much or Barbara didn't prepare too much on the who I am question because this is how I always start. So people who don't know me get a little bit of background before they decide if they want to listen or not. What I'll tell you is I've been studying political science for 12 years, and as part of that, at Stevens Institute of Technology, I had a year-long sabbatical to finish up the work of this book and do another project, which was going around New York City in a camping chair with another camping chair and this sandwich sign and a sand timer for 3 minutes, where I asked people to chat with me about politics for 3 minutes. And the reason that I did this is as an academic political scientist, most of the time, my understanding of political science questions comes through data or statistics or written testimony, but I don't really get to interact with people that much. And so in this year, I thought it was truly a gift to just do these one on one interactions. It taught me a lot, but I also like to start my talks with it because I guarantee you, no matter what question you have, it will not be the weirdest thing I heard because this exercise provided me with a ton of really interesting conversations. So please feel free to ask anything. Like I said, I'm at Stevens Institute of Technology, which is a premier engineering school in Hoboken, New Jersey, and it's not one that has a deep political science department. Instead, I'm the chair of our quantitative social science, which combines political science, sociology, and psychology all through a quantitative lens. But I couldn't have written this book had I not worked at this school, because at Stevens, we have some of the most dedicated, earnest learners I have ever been around. If you have engineering kids in your life, you understand they are pattern recognizers and systematizers, and they try hard. And it was being with them and seeing how little they knew about our government systems that got me thinking about this work in the first place. I also had 6 research assistants from Stevens undergrad who went with me to interview teachers in 47 states. They gathered the curricular requirements in every US state, and so I really had a lot of help from my undergrads in compiling the things that I needed for this manuscript. My very first political science academic contribution was a website called DC Inbox, which you all can visit online. It's just dcinbox.com. And what it is every member of Congress gets to send these official e-newsletters to their constituents. And I thought, well, there should be a database of that. They're taxpayer funded documents. We should be able to see what they are. They're sort of like the letters of our time and their primary sources. But back in 2009, when I went to the Library of Congress, they said they were archiving them manually, meaning they were printing all these out and then documenting them in different boxes. So I decided to make the online architecture for this, and it's the only one in use today. The New York Times use it. Harper's is coming out with something with it next week. Bloomberg is using it in the coming year. So I really like this project. This is some of the stuff that you can see in there. This is Joe Morell, who I understand some of you might be familiar with, and this is in his official capacity, an email that he sent out last month talking about the Affordable Care Act subsidies. You can also do things like put in any word that you want and see which parties have used it over time. So this is the word unconstitutional. And something that I think sort of interesting in this finding is Republicans say unconstitutional when you've got a Democrat in the White House, and then it drops down, and then it comes up again, and then it's going to drop down. And so I think, the way that we talk about politics really is in the eye of the beholder, or the party of the beholder. You can also do things like find out which states are talking about which topics. So, what you're looking at right now is emails that come out with the word beef. And the reason that I like to put this one up is because it highlights Kansas, which is where I'm from. I grew up in Kansas. I went to the University of Kansas, and then I moved out to New York City, where I've now been for the last 17 years. My first book was Congress and U.S. Veterans, from the GI Bill to the VA Crisis, and I really enjoyed writing that book, but this one is much better. That was one that someone else asked me to write based on the insights of DC Inbox. The one that I'm going to talk to you about today is one that I enjoyed and started on my own. When I'm not doing all this, I'm a member of Community Board 8 in Manhattan, which is the most hyper-local form of government. It's a 50-person body, and we concern ourselves with liquor licenses, cannabis licenses, sidewalk cafes, roadway dining, and a host of other small local area concerns. Most of that is me conducting meetings as the chair of our Street Life Committee, but sometimes you'll find me out on the streets of New York City fighting for pedestrian pathways, because the ways our laws are written is anytime an outdoor cafe is open, they have to give 8 feet of space to allow two wheelchairs or two strollers or push carts to go by. I'm obviously not 8 feet tall, and so sometimes my daughter and I go out and document when people are in violation of this, and then that's usually how it gets changed. But now, on to how to raise a citizen and why it's up to you to do it. This has been a project that I've been touring now for 18 months. I was on C-SPAN Book TV with it. Last year, Governor Hochul signed the book and blurbed it for its next release as a paperback, saying it's the most important topic of the year. And if you think like, oh no, it's like a liberal from New York and there's a liberal, she's going to say all these things. Former President Bush and Laura Bush also recognized the book. And so it's got sort of this appeal that I don't really consider bipartisan, but rather pre-partisan. It's something that you have to have before you can even think about picking parties, is you have to know what it is to be a citizen. So here's how I like to start. This is a picture that you don't need to remember, but what I want you to notice is that it's a patchwork. When we ask what are our kids learning about civics in school, there is no one answer, because every state gets to decide their own civics curriculum. Every state gets to decide if there's going to be a test at the end of that or not. Every state gets to decide how many minutes in the classroom, what documents are going to be offered, and so on. And beyond the 50 states making decisions, it's really split further, because the public schools have different things than the private or independent schools, which have different things than the parochial schools or the charter schools. So it's very hard to say with certainty, here's what a child in the America learns about civics. But what I can tell you is that there is a modal form of delivery, which is usually in 7th or 8th grade, children will get their first sort of dose of civics. This is where they're going to learn about colonization, they'll learn about westward expansion, they'll learn about the founders, and it's a very historical focus. Then we're usually quiet on the subject until 11th or 12th grade, when students will get a semester or a year-long class called government, where we try to teach them everything they need to know about the government. And unlike every other subject, which is layered from K through 12, where you start with little things, build a vocabulary, concepts, advocacy, civics is really taught as a dip in once in middle school, dip in again in high school. Some states do it better than others, but that's sort of the modal form of delivery across the United States, is a touch point in middle school and then one touch point at the end of high school. And I don't know if you all remember what you were like in your second semester of your senior year of high school, but I do know what I was like, and it wasn't, please teach me a bunch of new things. It's a time where our students are thinking about what's next in life, whether that's college, a family, a career. And so it's really too little, too late if that's when we're trying to give them everything they need to know about government. What I'm showing you here are the overtime results from what's known as the Nation's Report Card, which asks questions on 8 different subjects. It's nationally representative. There's poor schools and rich schools, and urban schools and suburban and rural schools. And what you're seeing is the data from 1998 until 2022 just for civics. That green band at the top would be if people had an advanced achievement level on this assessment. The yellow band is proficient. The blue band is where we are on average, and the red band is basic. If you were to sum this all up, only 23% of our eighth graders are scoring at a proficient level of civics awareness. Now, this is disheartening, but someone might say, well, they're only eighth graders, they're only 14 or so that doesn't really matter. It really matters when they're getting closer to be able to vote when they're 18. To look at that, we have AP US government scores. And before I talk about the results of this, what I should say is AP US government courses are only taken by about 2% of all US students. And the people who take this class opt into it, either because they like the subject or they think it'll be an easy A or they think they're going to be able to get out of a college credit by scoring well on the exam. But these are the people who are the best of the best, or at least have some desire to get into this class. And this is how they're doing. What you're seeing in this graph is the average score, which goes from 1 to 5 for an advanced placement class. On average, US government and politics is scored with a grade less than a 3. In order to get college credit, you have to have a 3 or above. So in 2019, the majority of students who sat for this test did not earn a 3, and it is one of the lowest scoring tests out of all of the tests administered. Something that's sort of troubling here is that nearly all of the students who sit for this exam will live the rest of their lives in the United States as US citizens under our politics and government. So this isn't something where we have a lot of international students coming and just not getting this right. It usually is domestic students who are taking this who still can't show a propensity to understand it. In 2023, if you look all the way down on the second column, you'll see that out of the 38 tests administered, it was the 37th worst. So we are really not doing a good job if you look at eighth grade or if you look at high school when the AP tests are administered. Now, in 2024, things did look differently. What I'm showing you here is 2016 to 2024, and the gray bars are other sorts of AP tests that we administer, and then the blue and red bars are AP history and AP US government and politics. You'll notice that in 2024, they both bump up in terms of their average score. Does anyone have any ideas as to what was happening or why that changed? Any
Uh,
guess is welcome. Yeah,
there
tell me,
was a
Barbara.
pretty lively election that year, wasn't there?
So I hear that a lot. People are like, well, there was election. That would make sense. We're all focused on it. We're all doing a lot of learning. I wish that was the answer. The answer is the test was recalibrated, which means we've essentially grade inflated our way into a worse problem because we wanted to give more students a passing grade. Once they get that 3 and above, some of them are going to be then exempt from a college class that's an intro to American government or some sort of intro to American history because they've got this 3. So we've sort of grade inflated our way into a way harder situation where we now don't know what we don't know because we just had this desire to pass these kids on and let more of the students earn a 3 if they take this class. What I'm showing you here is the other sorts of data that we have indicating that there's a real big challenge with our young people. And this is voter registration and voter turnout data. So what you're seeing here is the registered voters rates for 18 to 24-year-olds in all of the United States from 2024. And I've put New York purple because that's where we're at, Rochester, the Hamptons, New York City. And we sit near the bottom. And something that I find troubling here, as someone who has a daughter in the New York public school systems, is that we can pre register people in New York State at 16. They can be registered at 16. They can't vote until they're 18, but we do have the capacity to do this by law. And yet, we lag behind nearly every other state in our youth voter registration. When we talk about turnout in the United States, it's not necessarily that we have low turnout. It's more that we have low overall turnout because of that registration hurdle. If you compare the United States to other European democracies, our turnout rates, provided that the people are registered, are actually pretty comparable. But our turnout rates look way lower in these international comparisons because registration is truly the hurdle that trips people up. It's like that quiet contest that's going on 30 days before the actual contest. And so most of our young people just sort of miss this. When we're looking at voter turnout, This is probably not news to any of you either, which is essentially it's this little stacked staircase from 18 to 84 where it goes up and up every year. My students in college, when they complain to me about politics, a lot of the things that they say is like, everyone in politics is so old. And I say, okay, well, we think it's a representative democracy. Let's go see who's trying to be represented by voting. And then I let them go find the data. And then they're like, oh no, it's all these people who are older than me who are voting. And I'm like, yeah. And until this sort of starts to change, you're going to get outcomes that favor a population that understands how this system works. This is a presidential election that I'm showing you right here. This next slide is a midterm election. The x-axis is the same, where it's 18 to 85 and over. The slope is actually steeper. In the last midterm election that we had, nearly a quarter of our students didn't, only a quarter of our students who are 18, 19, and 20 turned out to vote. 75% of them who were registered stayed home, missed it, didn't know. And part of the challenge of this age is not just that they're brand new to it, but a lot of it is that for those who have moved away from home, they don't have someone to sort of take them to the polls or say, here's how you do this. My students who come to college will sometimes say, I'm going to stay registered in my home state because it's a swing state or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but I think it's going to be very hard in the middle of a semester on a Tuesday for you to go back there and cast a ballot. They'll say, oh, no, no, I'll do it absentee. And I'll be like, do you know where stamps are? Like, do you know how to buy stamps? Can you find that? And a lot of them are just not used to interacting with the US Postal Service. And so it's not just my sort of suspicion that it's hard to get this done. It's borne out year over year that college students who don't register where they actually live on their college campuses are far less likely to participate in politics that are happening states away, miles away. So there's a few different ways that we got to our civic deficit. One of them is that it's sort of hard. We have an intricate design. We have a beautiful design. There are plenty of benefits to the American system, but it's not something that you can learn in 2 semesters or even 2 years. When we think about what's taught in schools, we focus very heavily on federal politics. And that's sort of a shame because a lot of things that matter to young people, like reproductive rights, gun rights, medical or recreational marijuana, most of those things have been devolved down to the states to decide what they're going to do there. And a lot of times they're not taught anything about local politics at all. If you want to see what I'm talking about, next time you're around an 18 to 22-year-old, ask them what the word gubernatorial means. They will not know. They do not know what governorships are. They really don't understand these things, not through any fault of their own. No one's taught them. When we were doing our research about sort of community or norms in different places, we found there's two sorts of modes that the United States really has. One is more in the middle of the country and the South, which is this tradition of not talking about politics for fear that you might offend someone, that you might hurt someone's feelings. And so it sort of sits in this bucket of taboos with like talking about sex or drugs or how much money someone makes or religion. When we have that tradition of not talking, you don't develop the muscle memory to do that as an adult. And so that doesn't really serve our children to just say nothing at all. On the other side, there's this other tradition of hating politics. And what I mean by that is exposing our kids to language like everyone in politics is a crook or a cheat or it's rigged or they're liars or they're egomaniacs in it for themselves. When they hear that politics is something to be hated or something to disdain, it's not surprising that they don't want to go learn more or don't aspire to do that as they get older. And even if our households don't talk about politics or are trying to be positive about politics, children's media, literature, entertainment is replete with archetypes that are anti government and anti political. The two major ones are versions of a mayor. So if you think about children's cartoons, if there's ever sort of some political candidate or some political character, it'll usually be a mayor. And that person is either one, a bumbling doofus who like sort of gets it right, like Mayor Humdinger in Paw Patrol, who like things sort of turn out right, but really it's the other dogs that got it done. Or they're this other archetype, which is they're out to do harm to the city they're meant to protect. Like if you think about the mayor in The Simpsons or the mayor in this show that my daughter's watching right now, Riverdale. And so they have these two sorts of archetypes in our media that sort of teach our kids from a very early age, even if we're not doing it, that there's something to not like about politics. It's also the case that schools are out. And in writing this book, I don't mean to be anti school because I'm certainly not. I don't mean to be anti teacher because I'm certainly not. But I do mean to point out a reality, which is it's very hard to get this done in schools. And here's why. One is state legislatures are increasingly active in the way that they are mandating what can and cannot be taught in the classroom. This is not all anti civics, but some of this is on the civics adjacency spaces. You've maybe heard about, like, don't say gay, or we can't teach about racial history in these ways. All of these things tend to touch the social studies curricula, which means that teachers who are in those classrooms have a little bit more of a fraught environment because there's legislative oversight on the things that they're doing, more so than what you see in math or science. There's also a movement to get rid of what we call action civics or experiential civics, which, if you were a pedagogical scholar to say, like, how do kids best learn these things, they would tell you through something like project-based action civics. So an easy example of this is something that the Bronx River Academy up here does with their students, which is they give them a semester and say, find something in your community that you wish would be better, changed, fixed, whatever. I was there in 2024, and I met with a team who was unhappy about how cannabis shops were close to their schools. And so the task is identify the issue and then try to figure out the routes that you could get this changed. The assessment isn't, did you get this changed, yes or no, because most of the times they won't. But the learning is in figuring out, oh, is this something I talk to police about? Do I go to a commission? Is this the city council? Is this the mayor? Who has a hand in this? And in piecing all that together and figuring out who has decision-making power, making contact with them, asking the questions, students actually can learn a lot. But Texas in 2023 decided that that was no longer going to be a way that they could teach because it felt too political to have students be in contact with elected or appointed officials. This is all to say that there's just constraints that happen in the classroom that are making effective learning a little bit harder. It's also the case that I don't know if we have any teachers or former teachers on tonight. Something that we heard in talking with teachers, doesn't matter what state they're in, is there's so many things that have to happen in a day. And the sort of litmus test for if something's in the classroom is if it's not tested, it's not taught. And by the time you get to that high school environment, the things that are tested are the things that are going to be on the SAT or the ACT. And neither one of these tests has a social studies or civics component. The ACT did until 1987, and then to be more comparable with the SAT, it was eliminated. So because of that, there's such an extraordinary focus on mostly reading and math in order to ensure that high school graduating seniors can get as good a grade as they can on that SAT or ACT. Not just for the students, but also for the feedback that comes to teachers and entire schools for their overall scores. So those pressures mean that there's far more incentive to focus on those subjects, not civics. It's also sort of something where the courts and some administrative agencies have made it a little bit dicey as to what can happen in the classroom. In chapter 4 of the book, it goes through some different cases over time so you can see the trajectory of this. But it's all to say it's a little bit fraught in that classroom. An easier way to think about this is money. So for every $50 that the federal government spends on STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, it spends 5 cents on civics per year. And that's been the norm for a while. That was the statistics that were coming out when I was writing the book. However, in this last year, on the final thing that happened before that government shutdown that we had in 2025, the final thing that the Department of Education did was they issued $153 million in grants for civics education. And if you compare that to the fiscal years prior, it was far more grants than had been ordered in 2023, 2022, 2021, and prior to this. So there is opportunity in this coming year to have more civics funding. It's still not on the order of all of what goes into STEM, but it is something that's changed since I've written the book. And then finally, and I say this with proper trepidation and proper understanding that among us are parents, but one of the biggest problems about getting this done in schools in the first place are parents themselves. And what I mean by that is when we ask teachers, what is it that holds you back from talking about these things? They'd say the things like, yeah, there's not a lot of time in the curriculum. But something else is there is a lot of fear in saying what might be perceived as the wrong thing, even if it's well-intentioned, even if it's high-minded. Like, for instance, a teacher could say, there's 3 branches of the federal government. Congress is the first branch because it's Article 1 of the Constitution. If a student comes home and says that to their parents, a parent might hear, oh, that teacher doesn't like the president. And in getting angry about that, they might inflame a Facebook group or a PTA group or email the principal or badger that teacher themselves. And it wasn't just our interviews that sort of bore this out. The Sandra Day O'Connor Institute went and did a nationwide study on teachers. And what they found is that when you ask teachers systematically what it is that they're thinking about when they self censor or avoid certain civics topic, the majority of them say that they do this, and it's due to a fear of pushback or controversy. They also cite this lack of time curriculum thing, but this fear of creating a controversy is one that makes it very hard to do this in schools. Now, this is not to say social studies teachers aren't trying their hardest. I actually would invite you to think about the teachers that you really liked in high school. A lot of people really liked their social studies teacher. And something that we heard in doing this work is everyone knows who teaches AP US government. His name is Coach. And that was this little joke that a lot of teachers said because in many high schools, teaching social studies or AP US government is not a full-time commitment. And so in order to be a full-time employee, those people are also teaching wrestling, coaching football or track or swim. My own AP US government teacher was our football coach as well. And when Governor Tim Walz was nominated for vice president, he bore out that same joke, which was social studies teacher and coach. So I make the argument that our parents, our grandparents, our aunts, our uncles, and our communities should be agents of change to making our politics better. And it's not just because it's hard to get it done in schools, but in that year when I was talking to people on the streets about their thoughts on politics, I learned this sort of undertone, which was, I don't really like the way our politics is going. People would say it in different ways, but they'd say something about like our politics doesn't feel that good or it doesn't function that well. And they sort of saw themselves as passengers on like this ship of politics or this ship of democracy. And what we need to recast ourselves as is not passengers, but we are the crew. Like if we're getting seasick on where it's going, we have to decide to row together or row more systematically or try to figure out the places that we're trying to point this boat if we want it to not feel so bad. We know that our adults shape the way children in their lives dream. And what I mean by this is our kids look up to us for what they do, and they also look up to us for what we don't do, or they don't do what we don't do. So if they don't see us engaging in politics in a respectful manner, if they don't see us caring about our community, if they don't see us voting, it's really hard for them to develop that model for things that they should do. I also know, and I'm sure you do as well if you have children in your world, that children do politics. If you ever have kids who have to like figure out fairness of a game or who gets to do this thing first or resources that they have to divide, or even you went trick-or-treating on Halloween and now we're going to trade a bunch of candy, they do politics. They do collective decision making. They're also incredibly capable of learning these things. When we look at the Harvard study that happens annually of young voters, 87% of them say they care about these things. They want to know more. And why wouldn't they? They all want to be more adult at that age. It's that we don't really equip them with the know-how to get this sort of thing done. I also know that children or adults, no one likes playing a game that they don't know the rules to. It's not that fun. You're not going to do as well. And so the more we can equip them with knowledge and know-how, the more fun this game can be. Sometimes talking about politics doesn't just feel bad because you might disagree with someone, but sometimes it feels bad because it's not nice to feel out of your depth. And a lot of political questions make many of us feel out of our depth because it's impossible to know everything. So if we can shore up that baseline education with our young people, it's going to be easier for them to have these conversations in the first place. I also know that in a democratic republic like ours, things can only get better with more attention. Things can only get better if we have more representation around different people in our communities that voice their opinions and get outcomes that they like. We can sort of think about it as this groupthink magnification, which is every time you have more voters in your electorate, you're increasing the experiences, the thoughts, the histories of who can inform those decisions. And though things can get better if we have more people who understand what's happening, not just from a participation stance, but also from an understanding, from a mechanistic responsibilities. How is this happening? Those things can make our politics feel better. I also know that no matter if you're a T-ball coach, Little League, if you're doing something like Voter Girl for the Girl Scouts, people want the children in their lives to be as powerful as possible. They don't want them to go out into the world fearful or afraid or unaware of how to do it. We also, as parents, want our kids to be as healthy as possible, not just physically, but mentally. When we think about the things that plague our young people, depression, anxiety about the future, a sense of enemy and not mattering to anyone, getting involved in local politics serves as an antidote to all of those things because it's regularized, purposeful, in person action with others. And so I make many arguments in the book around how the counteraction to doom scrolling or this idea that nothing's going to get better and the future is all bad is translating that anxiety into action. So figuring out the ways that you can contribute. And even if you're young, you can do parks cleanups, you can do volunteers, you can do art for change. There's a lot that comes before voting. I also know that people want the kids in their lives to be successful. And so, though it's not the main point of this book, what I find is if you have a child who has worked or volunteered for local, state, or federal politicians, that makes them more attractive applicants for colleges. If they're local, it's because there's going to be connections to things like zoning. If it's state, guess what? There's going to be accreditation. If it's federal, there's grant money. But at all the levels, kids who interact with those systems show that they're pro-social, they're problem solvers, they give back to their communities. And those are all really attractive qualities for college. And finally, if we decide to take on these conversations with our kids, we benefit. Think about when you talk about children about something they don't know much about. They don't have a prejudicial lens. They don't think about something as a liberal or as a conservative. They come to it anew and fresh. And in having those conversations, we can either better affirm the ways that we think about things or even change the way we think about things because they're good conversational partners in this endeavor. So before I close, I will put a note out on partisanship because partisanship is inevitable in national politics. It is the case that what is cued by saying Democrat or Republican symbolically allows voters to sort of understand what they can expect out of a politician, and so it's inevitable. To pretend that it's not there does a disservice to our children. However, when we think about raising our kids, I try to think about this through analogy, which is raising a partisan is very different than raising a citizen. And the analogy is if you were trying to raise an athlete. Let's say you had a child who wanted to be a very good soccer player. You would teach them the rules of the game. You would maybe watch some of the older games, get some practice drills, hire a coach, do some scrimmages, practice matches with others. That would make them a really capable soccer player so that whenever they decided to go play, any team that was good that they valued would want them. If you were just raising someone to be a fan, you need to teach them here's the colors we paint our face, here's the chants and the songs that we have, we boo when that guy from the other team comes on, the end. But in politics, we're really all athletes. None of us are truly spectators. Some of us are more capable athletes than others. But when thinking about our children, we want to raise them to be citizens, raise them to be athletes in the sports of politics and government, and trust that they can pick their own teams as they get older. We need to give them the tools and let them develop their own agency, not just because that's going to equip them better, but because parties change. Ideology is fluid. The people who make up these parties change. So the idea that if you're a Democrat getting a little Democrat or Republican getting a little Republican doesn't necessarily mean the same thing intergenerationally because stuff does move around. It's also the case that even if you look at the best social science research on this question, it's about a coin toss that you can get the outcome that you want anyhow. So if you spend many years trying to convince your child to see the same party that you like in favorable light, you risk turning them off to rebelling into the other party or abstaining altogether because they're alienated from it. So it shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to equip them as much as you can to understand the systems and then let them go do what they're going to do in order to exercise that power. So in conclusion, doing this work is not that hard. Everyone who's on this call already does this work. League people are doing this. When parents ask me at the end of my talks, what's like the one thing I can do? I say you have to be willing to take this on. Because oftentimes we think schools are going to teach them all they need to know on this, but that's not true. And for parents who are raising children today, a lot of them were in school systems that were already underserving civics as a subject. And so I don't scold them for not knowing these things, but my request is that we all learn a little bit more to make things just a little bit better and impart that curiosity onto our children as a method for them to increase their capacity and make our politics feel better. I also think it's important for children to see parents care about these things, see aunts and uncles and grandparents care about these things. Whether that means bringing them to a state house, bringing them to vote with you, bringing them to a community meeting, show them what that sort of care is like. They might find it boring, but you never know whose civic role model you're going to be or who they might see there as a civic role model. And so it's important to expose them to these things. It's also really important for them to see politicians in the flesh. What I mean by this is oftentimes our kids think of politicians as these amorphous, nameless, faceless bureaucrats that are out in DC. My niece is 7, and when I told her about this book, she was like, Aunt Lindsay, I don't know who my mayor is. And I was like, oh, Piper, don't worry, we'll figure it out together. We sat down side by side, got online, found out who her mayor was. His name's Mayor Bacon. He's the part-time mayor of Olathe, Kansas. And we sent him an email together where I said, my niece is a constituent of yours. I'm going to be in town in September. Can we have a meeting so she can get to meet you? And you would have thought she was meeting the president, how excited she was for this. She like got dressed up and she told him what she wanted in her community, which was more horses. To my surprise, the Olathe, Kansas community actually has a stable of horses for the children to look at. She didn't know that either. So it was very worthwhile for us to have this exchange. But in seeing that, she learns that this is a neighbor, this is a friend, this is just a person. And in my experience in local and state government, federal can sometimes be a different question. But for those who are doing local and state government, these are mostly tryhards who really just think they have something to contribute. No one's actually out there trying to do harm to their neighbors or poison the communities around them. We might disagree on what we think is the good life or how to get there, but most of these people are working really hard on some vision of good that they see. And then my final plea is to check our negativity. This is not to say there aren't things that are challenging. This is not to say that there aren't things that merit criticism and things that merit being called out. But it is to say that we do need to give our children a counteractive vision of joy and a counteractive vision of competent government. So if you have a road that's repaved, make sure you point it out like, wow, this car ride feels a lot smoother now that our road's repaved. I'm so glad that the city got that together and made it happen. If you have a new park, or recreation facilities for seniors, or whatever it is that you value, I imagine you can find something in your community that is a positive view on government versus a negative one. And I ask everyone to think about when they have that opportunity and point it out to the children around them. Thank you so much for listening to me in this presentation. I think that, especially today, attention is sort of like the biggest form of generosity because we all have these split up attentions. So I feel really grateful that I could have yours for now. And any questions that you have, I'll be happy to answer them.
Wow, that gives me lots to think about. Yeah, I'm trying to imagine all the ways you introduce topics with different aged kids and
Well, let's see. I'll just make one question comment. When you were at the beginning, when you were going over the different grade levels that students are exposed to civics or American government, and you mentioned it starts in junior high with their first exposure, and then in the 11th and 12th grade in New York State everybody has to take we actually get more in New York State than I think what you said. We get a whole year in the 11th grade of American history, and then in the 12th grade everyone in New York State has to take a semester of American government and it's called participation in government, and a semester of economics. So we actually have 2 years in the 11th and 12th grade. And then,
Yes, that's right. New
yeah.
York does this better than other states in terms of, and even New York City has civics for all, where the children of New York City are exposed to government and politics every grade. So that's
Oh,
just the modal, like if you were to sum all of the states, but it's very hard to say here's what they're all doing. But on average, it's a dip in seventh or eighth and a dip in 11th and 12th.
so I love your examples of how you interest kids in learning about something like with your niece. And I'm just trying to imagine, do they come out knowing the three branches of government and checks and balances? Like, there's a lot of concepts that are sort of more academic than would come up naturally for most parents. So it's hard to teach them to think about politics in a scientific way for most people. I mean, some,
Absolutely. It's very hard. And it's not something where I think you need to like sit down and have a lecture night. And our children do not need us to be government trivia experts. They need us to model curiosity and problem solving. And so if they, you're not quizzing them, what does this branch do? What's this check? What's this balance? But it's being able to have a fluency and being able to talk about these things in a way that doesn't feel off limits or taboo or something that's like, oh, we'll tell it when you're older. It's being open to those conversations and sort of letting the academic pieces fill in where they can. But I will say, in terms of what do students know, most of the curricula that exist throughout the United States are very history focused and very little focused on like you, the individual. Most of it is like a story that is told where it's like there are these founders 250 years ago, they made this great document. Isn't this exciting? There's a little bit of civil rights, a little bit of civil liberties, but there's not really who's your mayor. There's not what does the city council do. There's not who's setting your speed limits. What about your school board? These questions really get left for us to figure out on our own once we're paying taxes, having our own kids. And so it's just opening up that dialogue, letting them know that anytime you admire a fire person or anytime you admire a police officer, there's a bureaucrat underlying that. There's a city employee doing that. There's someone who's approving those budgets or saying this is, a priority for our city or state. And it's letting them know that there's those other workers too.
mhm. I also just my mind goes to we should listen to NPR on the radio while we're driving around. That will cause conversations to happen that will be very
Yeah,
helpful.
I totally agree. And I think it's something where when you look at psychologists, an ability to have a conversation with a child that might be kind of harder, there is research to back up this parallel instead of face to face can sometimes be easier. So having those hard conversations when you're on a walk or if you're in a commute or a carpool or whatever, when you're sitting side by side, can be easier and less confrontational than doing it eye to eye.
Well, it just brings up topics that then they'll be curious about, hopefully, and you can add a little bit to their knowledge, and then you've talked about that, so something else might come up. And so it starts a conversation, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Um,
I think Susan, I see Susan
Yes,
Wilson. Hi.
yes, I did. I did have a comment and then sort of a question. I was, I'm not surprised when you said that college students who who register and then go, I mean, students who register and then go off to college, they tend not to vote because it's not their home area. And we do hear a lot of that. Oh, well, I'll just vote at home. And then they don't vote at home unless you've got a parent sending an application, halfway doing it for them. So, and I think that a lot of the league programs are very good at picking up the slack at that 11th and 12th grade level. um, I don't know that that's so before that because getting them to register to vote is not what you're going to do in the seventh grade, but at the 11th and 12th grade. But then you get them all primed, you get them interested, and then you send them. We let them go off to college, and there is no follow up there. I mean, so it's not like you can follow the kids that you've just worked with. It's not like a group you can follow. You have to be able to hand them off to someone else who's going to pick up that enthusiasm that we have created in a lot of our programs. And I see that being a really tough thing to happen. It's not happening, obviously, if so few of them are voting.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's something where if I could wave a magic wand, I would make it so that every university, as part of orientation, gives them voter registration forms that have their dorms
Hmm.
as where their residences are. I've lobbied for this within my own school, and I have like an optional table at registration and orientation. But if I could magic wand it, it would be that this is part of what it is to become a citizen of our university, is then you're going to understand our town. And it's something where some colleges, they have better or worse relationships with their local government. We just had a mayor's race in Hoboken, which is small. We're like 60,000 people. And I said to our students, I was like, look, last year only 1,250 of you turned out to vote in this mayor's race, which isn't a lot because there's 8,000 of you here. But the winner won by 970. So it's actually a pivotal amount. So if we could just keep this up, you guys can really matter. And sometimes it's putting it in those sort of broken down, oh, I see it, that works. But it's really hard work. And it's something that you all know. It's all hands on deck. Every different piece has to like contribute to it. So the volunteer work that the league does is pivotal in these sorts of things.
Hmm. So one thing our league started doing a couple of years ago, we go into high schools and register high school students, and actually the registration rates have been going up a lot because of the DMV asking them when they get their driver's license if they want to register. But that means that, if they did that when they were 16, by the time they turn 18, if they haven't thought about it, they've forgotten. So we're mailing them a birthday postcard around their 18th birthday, reminding them that they're voters now. We
That's
get
great.
we get the list of pre-registered students, so we know who's turning 18 each month, who's already registered, and that's who we send it to.
That's such good work.
Yeah.
And may I ask a question, Barbara? Do you get that information through Van?
No, we get it because it's not included in Van because
Oh,
Van only has registered voters. So we get it from our Board of Elections.
okay.
Yeah.
So the Board of Elections is allowed to provide the birth dates of the students.
All birth dates of all voters are in the database you can get from your Board
You
of
can,
Elections.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
And then,
Uh, so you had a New York mayoral election as well as Hoboken, and the youngest person ever got elected. So I have the feeling that young people were on fire in a new way in New York City this past year.
Yeah, it
So,
felt that way. And young people have been more able to sort of navigate ranked choice voting in a way that doesn't it's a bit more easy for them to understand it at the first pass. So that's been, I guess, promising for them.
mhm. So this thing where students were disenchanted because all the politicians were so old, it really follows through that if you get younger politicians, they get more interested. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting.
Susan, I saw you came off mute and so did
Yes,
Mary.
I grew up outside Washington, D.C., so I was really lucky because it was just an integral part of our being to be aware of who was who and what was what. And so I had an eighth grade teacher who was appalled that we didn't know all the cabinet members and yes, all. In fact, I can tell you Kennedy's cabinet by heart. Um, but I think it was just part of the milieu that you were interested in government, and I think I don't know. And I think that I carried that with me to, my daughter and my grandson. We all go to vote together. We wear our I voted stickers. We always got for bagels after we vote. So I think it's also kind of getting those traditions going that's
So
helpful.
much. Yes, it's the traditions and it demystifies the process. Can you imagine being an 18-year-old for the first time and having to go into a community center by yourself or like wherever these things happen? It's hard. And so I'm so glad that you do that with all the generations that you have responsibility for.
And that's what my son-in-law said the first time he went to vote. He said he got in the voting booth. It was back in the days of the old lever voting, which I liked. Felt very dramatic to open the curtain and have all the levers move. But he said he got in there and he said he didn't know what to do. Uh, so yeah, I think it's also just that pure functional. What do you do when you're standing there in front of this ballot?
Yeah, or what documents do you need to bring, depending on where you're at?
And
So, one of some of my early memories about learning civics was that my family got the Kansas City Star every morning, and we sat around reading the newspaper while we ate breakfast, and we commented back and forth. And
oh.
I don't suppose any family is doing that these days.
No, it'd be
Oh,
really hard. Something that I tell parents to do though is your kids are getting political information. It's just not stuff you're going to see. So if you think about what happens in their sort of feeds, whether that be YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, they cannot avoid political information. And they're seeing some really violent political information too. So with Charlie Kirk's assassination, plenty of very young people were exposed to really traumatic imagery kind of instantaneously. Same thing with what's happened in Minnesota. And so I think it's important to check in with our kids to just the way that I put it in the book is you don't need to make them defensive. And I don't think you should ask them like, what do you think on this? But the first question I always say as a check-in is, what have you heard about this? So like my daughter came home earlier this week and she asked me point blank, what is the Epstein files? And she's 13. And I said, well, what have you heard about this? And she said, I know that there's a person and I know that President Trump is in it too. And I was like, okay, where are you hearing it? And she said, some of the kids were talking about it at school. And so then I said, okay, well, there are the files, and you can actually read a lot of them. They've been released by the Department of Justice. I don't think you're probably going to enjoy that activity. This is, hard stuff, and it seems like young girls were exploited. And I sort of described the how that happened. And she was like, well, I could see how that would happen. I could see why someone would want to go over and to that person's house. And I was like, yeah, but it's not shying away from conversations. Whereas if I had raised that with my mother, the answer would have been, we'll talk about it when you're older, or that's not for you to think about. But the thing is, if I don't fill in those blanks, if I don't chat with her, she can go to her room and say, like, Alexa, or she can ask a person on the internet. She can see really horrible things. And I was like, you want to be the trusted adult who can have the conversation instead of pushing them to go figure out stuff on the scary internet.
that's the same message I learned when I went to a workshop on how to talk about sex with your children. He said, you want to be their source of information.
But
Patricia, yeah.
it is interesting what kids pick up. I'll try to make this story short. We were with our grandson and we were looking for a place to get ice cream. And we saw, a place that had an ice cream cone outside. So my husband went in to check whether they really had something and came out and said, no, it was a Chinese restaurant now. So we drove off and my grandson from the back seat goes, well, that's just like the Chinese. That's just like Chinese people. And we were like, oh, okay, let's back up and talk about this. And so I said, so tell me what you're thinking about Chinese people. And he said, well, Granddad is always talking about China this and China that. He said, oh, okay, let's have a little talk about China versus people who are Chinese. And it was just like, we just talked about it. And then he was like, oh, okay. It wasn't like he didn't feel bad when he did. It was just like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. So yeah.
That
I was a poll worker for a number of years, and often people would bring their kids. Well, of course, what are you going to do with your kid? I mean, but it was cool because they'd bring the children in and we'd give the children a sticker, and kids love stickers. I mean, these are little tiny kids. And I seem to remember, this may be a faulty memory, I seem to remember of being able to take my son into when they had the flip thing, the curve thing. So I'm not saying that I did that consistently or that it was effective, but you can take a little kid in and they can see what you're doing, and it's sort of demystifying. I'm just thinking if I had done that all the way through, it might have been an effective learning process, to be able to see what I was doing behind that curtain and just step one kind of a thing.
Yeah, and you know that can go a little bit farther. Something that I really appreciate about Ulster County is they, before they have elections, they have a sticker contest where they have middle schoolers and high schoolers who get to draw or use computers to design funny stickers. And so in the book, I have the picture of the one that they selected in 2022, which is this crazy spider that has like a bunch of
We've seen
different
it.
legs. Yes, the crazy. And then the last 2 years they had like a Statue of Liberty holding a pizza. They had like a sweet little kitty cat voting. And so that's something I was giving a talk to the International City Managers Organization, and we were talking about like different things that local governments and city governments can do to do this. This is a way that kids can be involved in politics. It's not voting, it's art for change, or it's art for expressing patriotic creativity thoughts. So I think yes, stickers are always good to give out at elections, and even better is if the kids design them themselves.
Yeah.
You're making me think. I think I've seen advertisements for like these tiny little printers that can make stickers or buttons on the fly. You could actually do something pretty cool. I'll have to
Yeah,
look
you
into
could with young people. Yes, like and
it.
that's like a press and they can make little buttons. The James Madison's Montpelier in Virginia has something like that for their We the Kids Day. And they like give kids little sort of motifs that they could use just to like get them thinking about it, and then they make their own buttons.
Mhm.
We do have one of the new citizens events takes place at Genesee Country Village. So I'm thinking, that's a place where kids, families go and maybe take advantage of that opportunity to, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it a fun thing and it's a family thing and the whole thing.
Yeah, you could have a little art project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And talk about voting then
Hmm.
Mary, I
before.
see you waving a bunch.
No, I was wondering, I was thinking about the college students coming in. Maybe they've registered at home, but how much more effective it would be if you could get them to register locally. Are they more apt to go? Because then you can have a college event where everybody goes. What is the objection that the school has, in your example, to handing out registrations forms with the dorm address in it, or as much filled out as you could?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the specific pushback is, because we also have a class that we make all of our freshmen take called the Freshman Experience, and that's where they're teaching them how to like balance a checkbook. And I was like, can we just please? They're none of them are going to balance a checkbook, like that's never going to exist for them, but they might have to vote. And so our school does a lot of things really well on those things. It might be that I'm not squeaky enough yet, and that is mine to continue to take up. Is that this is something we need to do. Or maybe I just have to put it all together for registration.
The
Yeah, I
league
just
did
was wondering because it might be something we should be suggesting to the universities we work with. We have a pretty good relationship with some of them, but that seems like an easy
Well,
way to do it.
and we know that it works. RIT is here, Rochester
Hmm.
Institute of Technology, and they self-surveyed a few years ago, and some pitifully low percentage of their students were registered, maybe 20 or 30. And they set out to improve that, and they're up to 70%. So,
Yeah, you can
we
really
go
make
there.
big leaps. You can. We did that at our school too because there is it's NSLVE is this national consortium that colleges can opt into to see how many of their students are registered to vote. And it took us one cycle of like me and two of my colleagues seeing that data and then just doing a big voter registration drive and then hoping the students can continue to run that. So it's very possible to do it, but a lot of times schools just they're stretched. They're doing other things. They don't think about this as their mission. Not everyone's, I mean, especially in engineering schools, they oftentimes
Mhm.
think like that's for some other sort of humanities discipline or something. But
Well, the
I think it's a great idea.
group at RIT is pretty active, and as I remember going there to do a voter registration, it was led by a student group, I think. And actually,
Sure.
it's huh?
Yeah, yeah, that's Roar. They've done a great
Yeah,
job, but
yeah,
it's the
yeah.
others I was more worried about, like U of R and some of the others.
And the RIT was you know, really carrying the ball to do it, and
Mm.
very active kind of a
Yeah,
thing. I mean,
I always thought it should be done through student life, and all the
Mm-hmm.
RAs in the dorms ought to have um, forms and be
Mm.
ready to answer questions.
Yeah, we had an event that I did really like where our students this year for our race, we also had a city council race. It wasn't like a stump speech, it wasn't a debate. It was sort of like speed dating the candidates where they could sit at a table and then everyone could sort of rotate around and they didn't get to like hold court necessarily, but they just got to meet a bunch of different people and it wasn't candidate versus candidate. And I was like, just see if you like them as people. See like what it is, if you think they seem competent, aligned with you or not. And I really liked that. And it met our nonpartisan sort of requirement in the sense that the city council race is nonpartisan and we invited everyone. And it was just like, you're just talking with them on our campus.
Yeah. Okay, any more comments or questions for
I just
Lindsay?
want to follow up on that last comment. So it was like, what did they call those dating things where
Speed.
you speed
Speed
dating?
dating.
No, no, were
Yeah.
they at different tables and the politicians moved from group to group and chatted, or
The
they
politicians sat, they had four different tables, and the students got to go
tables
place to
each?
place.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, there wasn't any crosstalk, like he's a liar, I don't believe him. Better. It was not that. It was
Right,
just,
right, right. So
yeah.
it's the same concept as when you said get to know each other and do they like them and what do they think? Yeah, it's the same kind of
Yeah.
concept without the
No romance.
you're right, and
Yeah.
without the political nastiness that sometimes comes. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, good.
All
Well,
right.
I never like to keep people for more than is necessary. So thank you all so much for having me out. This was really fun. And it's like such a good way to kick off 2026 thinking about this topic because I know that we have the 250th birthday or anniversary, however we're going to think about this. We also have midterm elections for every single House member. And so I'm excited to have some of this energy moving into this year.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. If anyone ever needs to contact me, I'm easy to find online. And if you get a chance to have the book and you have feedback, please email me. I would love to hear what you think of it. Thank
Yeah,
you for having me.
we have a book club, so maybe they'll read it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay,
Have a good
bye-bye.
night. Bye.